It's my lucky day. It's my lucky day. It's my lucky day. My lucky day. Don't need a pot of gold.
Good morning, everybody. Today, what is today? Today's August 10th. I want to welcome you to episode 16 of Coffee and Cloud Native. My name is Adrian Goins. Every night I scour the internet for news and content related to Kubernetes and Cloud Native, and every day you'll find me here to share the bits that I find interesting. This is a curated list of content. I go through around 200 submissions every night, and I only select a handful for the next day's show. If you're watching, now or in the future, please click that thumbs up button on the video so that the YouTube algorithm shares this with other people. I love putting the show together because it helps me end each day with knowledge that I didn't have when the day began. And I'm grateful that you're here with me so that I can share it with you and so we can all learn and grow together. It's a half-hour show. I always run late because I just talk too much. Keep trying to make it on time. Let's get started. Good morning, Nuno, and good morning, Peter. Thanks for joining. All right. External DNS. It manages records for load balancer services and ingresses through a cloud DNS provider's API. And, well, they released 0.7. Now, this is a milestone release because it enables awareness of the records that the controller is managing, which means that it'll now work with non-empty zone files. And that's huge because nobody has everything in their Kubernetes cluster in one zone file. There's always other stuff mixed in with there. Good morning. Talk is hard. There's always other records mixed in, and you don't want some automated utility being like, I own the zone file. So this is a great new release. You can test it with dry run first, so you can make sure that it's not going to destroy anything else in your zone file. And that's a good thing. Good morning, Tej. Hola, Sebastián. Gracias por venir. Totally forgot what I was doing. Polyaxon. All right. If there was something else that I wanted to do besides Kubernetes and Cloud Native and the stuff that I'm doing, where I thought, this is something that's going to change the future of humanity, it would be machine learning and AI. Unfortunately, it's just one of those things where it's like, I'm in a train going this way, and that's another train going that way, and as it passes by, I'm just like, no, and then there it goes. Because there's so many things that I want to learn and do and be good at, and there's just not enough time for all of them. Anyway, Polyaxon is a machine learning platform for Kubernetes. It's open source, it's powerful, it integrates with a whole bunch of other apps and tools, and they released version 1.1.6 last week. If you do anything with machine learning and data science and Kubernetes and you use this, let me know in the comments or on Twitter or something so that I can pick your brain and maybe try to figure out how to get just a little bit of machine learning into like one of my bots or, I don't know, something. Have you ever seen the intro for His Dark Materials, the TV show? Not the terrible movie that they released, but in the beginning, there's like, they show the world. And then they like turn it on its side and then they zoom out and it like becomes just a thread. And it's like one of a billion other threads of parallel universes. That's kind of how I feel. Like there's just so many things that I want to learn and do and be good at, and I just don't have enough time. So we'll be good at what we're good at and dream about the rest. Polyaxon website. Yeah, they support all sorts of crazy stuff. And they're 100% open source. Okay, all right. Welcome to Inception, again. I saw on the show on Friday that occasionally I would become like, or something. I'm sorry about that, that's YouTube. And hang on. Before we talk about Loft and Inception and stuff, I'm still trying to get better internet. I think I told you guys last week or the week before that there's a company who has an antenna and a tower on the hill right next to my house, and I'm trying to get them to give me internet. Well, because I actually need reliable internet, I need reliable internet to specific destinations. So I said, okay, your pricing while it's exorbitant, it seems like I'll probably pay it. So I need to see traceroute and ping times to these destinations, and I need to know who you get connectivity from, what your ASN is, and how big your outbound pipes are. Because if they're going to sell me a 10 megabit pipe, I don't want them having 1 megabit out to the internet. So I have my friend that I hired that's handling all of this for me because my Spanish isn't good enough and I'm from the United States and culturally it's just different. Anyway, they responded that that's proprietary and secret information and no real company would show you trace routes or ping. That's what I'm dealing with. I'm dealing with people who don't understand the technology that they're selling. So I replied to my friend, who does a really good job of taking my what the blah 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 and turning it into estimado, quiero blah 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 blah. Like he's so polite, which is great because otherwise people just wouldn't talk to me. Anyway, I replied that it's like getting on a bus and going to Santiago or whatever, and like you want to know what route the bus driver is going to take, and you want to know, does he drive 10 kilometers an hour on a dirt road? Like, is he in a Ferrari that really has the engine of a little bicycle or something in it? Hoping that he can explain this to them. I hope they can sell me internet. Anyway, I'm sorry about whatever in the YouTube and the let's get back to it. I was in a Zoom call at work and somebody was like, "Oh, did everybody just freeze?" And I was like, "No, it's you." Actually, we all just went. So try that in a call sometime, like just be in the middle of it and see if anybody notices. Okay, Loft. So, like Inception, except we're already like 12 dreams deep in this. So you got a Kubernetes cluster. You want to let other people use it, but you don't want them to go breaking stuff. You're not happy with just like sticking them in a namespace because, why would you do that? That's what everybody else does. No, let's go crazy. So you build them an entire virtual cluster that lives in that namespace, except they have no idea that it's not a complete dedicated cluster. That's what Loft is. And it's crazy. It's totally crazy. So I've always been bothered by the Kubernetes documentation saying, namespaces are like virtual clusters, because they're kind of not. Like, they kind of are, but they're kind of not. Like, I want a cluster to be like a cluster. In a namespace, it's a logical isolation of things, but it's not. It's just different. So these guys have created virtual clusters inside of namespaces. You can even do things like put them to sleep when they're not used. And if you combine that with cluster autoscaling in a cloud provider, this can actually spin down unused cloud resources and then leave you with a much smaller bill at the end of the month. Who doesn't love that? We are going into spring here. Going into spring, which means there are flowers, which means that you're going to start seeing my nose be more red as I wake up in the morning, and blowing my nose all the time. And I will try not to do that on the show, but you might see me like go and like mute myself and disappear off camera. I'm sneezing. So Loft released 0.3.3 3 days ago. Check out their content. They've got like videos that show you stuff. Their video is actually a little bit complicated for a quick start demonstration. It gets crazy quick. This is something that I would very much like to throw into a cluster and see what it can do. Not that I need virtual clusters inside of clusters, but come on. You want to go even crazier? Nestybox. Nestybox, what a cool name. They have a tool called sysbox. This turns a Docker container into a virtual server that's capable of running Docker, systemd, Kubernetes, and more with complete isolation. So it's not unlike K3D, which runs K3S inside of Docker. This runs anything. It's like kind. And yes, you're correct, except kind is running Kubernetes, not installed by you. So if you want control over Kubernetes or over systemd or like Docker and Docker and Docker and Docker and Docker and just kidding. Check this out. They even have a section in their documentation that talks about how, I don't have it up, talks about how you can build your own kind containers, and they say that their implementation of it is less complicated and faster than using kind. So come on, what's not to like? Less complicated, faster, and you built it yourself. Sounds like a win. I look at these things, and there's an element of, wow, this is really cool. And then there's an element of, why in God's name would you do this? And I wonder which one of them matters more. I'm sure that there are use cases for this where it's a perfect fit, but all I can think of is can I run a Docker container that's running Kubernetes, that's running Rancher, that installs Kubernetes, and a Docker container that's running Kubernetes, that's running Rancher, that installs Kubernetes? And how deep can we go? And why? We're already on physical machines that are virtual machines that are running virtual machines that are running containers that are running Kubernetes that can run virtual machines that can run containers that can run I don't know. And I'm just back to the why, but it's so cool. We say that oh yeah, we do this for the developers. Come on. At the same time, we talk about how developers don't care about Kubernetes and they don't want to be bothered with this stuff, yet we give them crazy nonsense like this. I think it's just for us. I think it's for the nerds. If you think it's for the nerds, give the video a thumbs up. If you think it's not for the nerds, give the video a thumbs up. It's still very cool, right? Yeah, they have cool images. All right, so that's sysbox from Nestybox. Gravity. Gravity released... Gravitational released an update to Gravity a few days ago. Let's just see what's blowing up in the chat. Friday was very max headroom. Yeah, last week YouTube was having all sorts of issues. They seem to be better this week. K3D on K3D. Does it make K90? Well, wait just a second, because we've got K1S, K3S, K8S, and in a second, you're going to see K14S, and I don't even know what that's an abbreviation for. Trick says, just because you can doesn't mean you should. This is true. Certainly true. And Chris says, people wonder if they can, and then they don't stop to ask if they should. And Wojtek says it's for the nerds. Yeah, it's totally for the nerds. I mean, if people didn't do this stuff, what would I have to talk about? I'd be like, Apache 2.4.3 came out, and it does the same thing. Anyway, okay, so gravitational, Gravity. I struggle with this. I've been on the fence about Gravity for years. Not because it's not cool, not because it doesn't have a place in the landscape. The premise for their software, if you don't know about them already, is that they create images of Kubernetes clusters and everything running inside of them, and they're just tar files. So you can ship this to another destination, and people can extract it, and it becomes a Kubernetes cluster. It's like, I don't know, one of those resurrection plants or something. You put it in water and it's like, blah. It treats a cluster kind of like a container image where you know that any cluster launched from that tarball is going to run exactly the same. And they have two use cases for it that I can identify. One is air gap, and I totally get that. If I'm going to run a cluster inside of an environment that has no connectivity to the internet, there are a number of ways that I can do that. One is I bring in all the images and I set up a registry and I kind of build the cluster pretending that it's internet. And I think in that use case, Gravity is a much better solution. You just build the cluster over here, zip it up, whoop, put it over there, pow, open it up, and you're off to the races. It's the other use case that I struggle with, and I need your guys' help to tell me, to just help me understand if it's possible, or tell me that, yeah, I'm right, and this is not as interesting as they're pretending that it is. The other use case is that you're a developer with an application, and you want to ship your application to people who use your application. Your application runs inside of Kubernetes, and you don't want them to just install it into Kubernetes for whatever reason. So you install it inside of a cluster, and then you ship that, and they fire it up, and it's got your application. So basically, you're shipping your app with a cluster, like it's an installer, and you're forcing them to run your app in a separate Kubernetes cluster on separate infrastructure. Because why? Because you don't trust them to know what they're doing? Because they genuinely don't know what they're doing? Because you're just super arrogant and think that your application needs its own cluster? I mean, what happens if they start running multiple apps for multiple people using Gravity? Do they get one cluster for all of them? it just, I just don't get it. But then I try to reconcile this with the fact that it's on version 7. So, like, somebody's using it. Or is all of the use case just air gap and they're pretending that it's this other thing? I don't know. So I need you guys to help me out. Let me know in the comments. Let me know in the chat. Like, is this legit for non-air gap use cases? Or is it a solution that just doesn't have a problem? Instance Manager. Instance Manager creates and manages EKS worker nodes from within Kubernetes. So this was ripped out of kops, I think, because they talk about kops. It doesn't actually directly say that it was ripped out of kops. So it either clones kops functionality or it was ripped out of kops. Whatever. Here it is. And basically, it maps this CRD for an instance group to, right now, it's an autoscaling group inside of AWS. And it works with EKS, managed EKS, and EKS Fargate. Okay, great. You start out with one node in your instance group because this has to live somewhere. And then you can dynamically attach an instance group with, and it basically just controls an autoscaling group. So you've got your minimum and max sizes here. You can set it up to use spot instances. You can set it up with max unavailable, so it'll do rolling updates in and out. And the spot instance thing I thought was pretty cool. You set a price, and if it finds that spot instances are better priced than on-demand instances, then it'll actually roll out your nodes to spot. And then if it changes, it'll roll them back in to on-demand. Not that spot prices should ever cost more than on-demand. That would be a terrible marketing decision. But whatever. If spot prices are less, then you get rolled to spot, and that's cool. The idea here is that changes can be made from within Kubernetes, which means that they can be made in response to events within Kubernetes, and then it becomes a local way to manage the instances instead of having to reach out to AWS directly and run this as a separate external process that requires more management and blah, blah, blah. Although it's alpha, it looks quite robust. They have lots of documentation and examples on how to get started. Okay. Cap. This is one of those things where I'm like, all right, I spent a lot of time looking at this last night, and I'm pretty sure that I understand about 1% of it. These are tools from the folks over at K14S who have a super retro website that you totally can't see. Yeah, you still can't see it. But it's super retro, and that counts. Basically, Cap is an application management tool for Kubernetes that focuses on deployment workflow and not on packaging. That's its own thing. Kapp-controller takes this into the Kubernetes cluster with CRDs. They have super sparse documentation here. There, read me. Let's go over here. Oh, that's even worse. So for the GitOps fans, it turns Cap into a continuous cluster reconciler. It abstracts away the origins of apps. So it can pull from Helm, it can pull manifests over HTTP, it can pull from Git, it can pull Docker images via image pack. It supports templating and works with a bunch of other tools that they have, like YTT, and I'm guessing that's pronounced Cobalt because I played D&D, and so I'm not sure how else you would pronounce it. The best thing about this is it enforces that every application is tied to a service account. So you can't actually deploy things with cluster admin privileges unless you have permission to do so and intentionally go out of your way to flip bits and twiddle knobs and say, yes, I want this deployed with cluster admin privileges. Otherwise, it enforces good behavior of make a service account, it's tied to a namespace, and by doing so, you can now have users with access to a namespace who can do stuff with that namespace, with the secrets and everything, and you get this nice, well-enforced security boundary. You get a nice, well-enforced security boundary. I was going to say something about, like, if you have users who aren't behaving and want to launch stuff with cluster admin or whatever. Honestly, like, even for me, it's about laziness. Like, something that enforces me to follow best practices is actually good for me. Otherwise, I'll just Be lazy all day long. I don't know who these people are. I've found some stuff that looks like it links them to VMware, but they have really cool tools, and there's people attached to the repo, but I don't know what K14S stands for. I don't know who they're connected to, but they've got a cool retro website. They've got lots of cool tools. They are worth checking out. Continuing down the GitOps path, we have Werf. This is a GitOps tool that pulls content from a Git repo, builds images, pushes them into a Docker registry. Let me show you their cool little graphic here so that you have visual animation of what I'm talking about. Pushes it into a Docker registry, and then it deploys apps to Kubernetes using a Helm chart that references the new content. It does some cool stuff with the registry where it actually keeps track of unused images and deletes them from the registry, so you don't have this ever-growing registry of images if you're doing lots of updates to your apps. And while it's not a CI/CD system itself, it can work with your CI/CD system to enable a Git repo to be the single source of truth, not only the code, but the instructions on how to build and deploy that application. And this is just standard GitOps stuff. Trick says maybe K14S wants to sound twice as big as K8S, but then wouldn't it be K16S? I don't know. Math is hard. I don't know. They're like secretive, like a secret society. I mean, come on, the little black and white website. It's cool, right? I remember making websites like that back in 1996. Blink tags. Not really. I never used Blink. Proud to say that. This isn't really a tool, but I just wanted to give a shout out to Sweetwater. We had Zebrium on the show in episode 5. They use AI for incident detection and root cause analysis, and they look absolutely amazing. And so this is just a case study that popped up about how Sweetwater used them for some cool stuff. Basically, they had incidents that were really hard to track down, and the root cause analysis was taking on average 3 hours. And with Zebrium, they were able to get that down to a few minutes. But Sweetwater sells musical equipment online. They're a big online retailer of musical equipment. I have bought lots of things from Sweetwater. I thought it was really cool to see that they have a massive cluster out there. 300 Ubuntu virtual machines on VMware. It says 40 Kubernetes workloads on GKE and GCP, but I'm guessing that means 40 Kubernetes clusters on GKE and GCP. Because 40 Kubernetes workloads just doesn't sound that impressive. And wow, like I had no idea. That's a massive cluster that they use for mission critical things related to the delivery of their service and tracking orders and shipping and stuff like that. So shout out to Sweetwater. Nice to see you're in the game. The last one, before we get to the tool of the day, before we have to wrap this up, oh my gosh, time's going by so quickly, is Connaisseur. And first, what is that like? That's not actually how we spell connoisseur in English, and I find that to be oh, because it says AI. Maybe? But it doesn't do AI. I don't know. It's not spelled correctly, but I'm guessing there's a reason why. This is an image admission controller. Sorry, it's an admission controller for Kubernetes that enforces that images are signed. Right? Sounds like a good idea. Apparently, you can... Oh, is that how they spell connoisseur in French? But connoisseur is already a French word. Nuno says it's French. But, like, it's spelled O-I. I don't know. Anyway, these guys... apparently, you can enable Kubernetes. You can enable signed images in the Docker engine on a Kubernetes cluster, and it just ignores it. You can still publish unsigned images. There's a tool that only works with IBM Cloud. These guys didn't like that, so in true open source spirit, they said, well, let's just make a tool that works everywhere. And so they did. It works with Notary from Docker, which is also open source. And I discovered last night that there's actually a public Notary server that you can just use. I mean, I knew of Notary from looking at Docker Enterprise Edition, but I guess that's kind of gone the way of the dodo now or something. I'm not sure. So this works with Notary, and you can sign your images and push them out. And since it's public and open source, like why aren't we all signing our images? And then the admission controller forces you to use signed images. It does exactly what it says it does, and that's kind of it. They have a cool article on Medium that shows you how to use it. Shows you how to use it with the public Notary server. And then over here, they've got more information on how you want to use it. If you want to use it with your own Notary server, or actually testing and showing that it works and doesn't work, if images are signed and unsigned. And then how to set a policy for what you actually care about and what can be excluded from the requirement that it be a signed image. You remember on Thursday when I was talking about Quake? I actually got it running on Friday. And I was able to do it. Sure enough, it was the timeout. Oh, is this going to not work now? Oh, not work. Oh, there we go. All right. So it was the timeout. Go was defaulting to 10 seconds. So I was able to archive all of the content and bring it down to my local environment, set up a Nginx mirror of it. And I spent part of Friday afternoon playing Quake with my wife, and then I discovered that you can actually put bots in this thing, so that you can play with the machine itself. So that's super cool. That's not the tool of the day. I just wanted to circle back to that because I was like, oh, it's the tool of the day, but I couldn't get it to work. It's amazing. It's so retro. But today's tool of the day is actually kubectl-evict-pod. And this is a kubectl tool that uses the Eviction API to gracefully shut down and reschedule pods. I often just go in and I'm like, just delete that pod and let's just get it rescheduled somewhere else. And that's like, ripping the cord out of it. This is interesting. I did some upgrades to Tej. Tej says, launch the rocket. Dude, the bot actually talks smack back to you. It's pretty funny. Where was I? Oh, right. So I did some host upgrades this weekend, and I didn't have pod disruption budgets running on stuff, so I was just like, whatever, and they just got rescheduled. And it was totally, it was not the right way to do it. So I decided, maybe I should put some pod disruption budgets in there. But if you're doing that, you need a way to test them. And you need a thing that accesses the Eviction API. This tool will do that. And in fact, in their README, they talk about, set up a pod disruption budget, and you can actually see, that it works. So you can set your budget, test the eviction, make sure that things are working as they should. And then this will play in when you go to drain your nodes before doing maintenance on them. It'll actually drain them in a way that adheres to the PDB. So if you have something that has a bunch of pods running, it'll make sure that it evicts them and that they get rescheduled elsewhere so that you don't have an interruption in service. You can install this with Crew. I'm sorry, Alex. I feel bad talking about Crew because Alex has Arcade that has a lot of the same stuff in it and has a lot of other stuff that Crew doesn't, but there's a lot of stuff that's also in Crew. So you can install this with Crew and then use it instead of using kubectl delete. Be a good Kubernetes citizen. That sounded very like Starship Troopers. Do you want to know more? Okay, so quick check of the chat. Yeah, so gravity for air gap, Peter says. Yep. Peter says, yeah, he hopes that they're not trying to go down the rabbit hole of a Kubernetes software installer. And yeah, me too, but that's what they've been doing. Okay, so that's it for today. I'm going to try and, we got like a minute left. I'll post all of the links in the video description and in the Git repo as soon as the show ends. If you follow me on Twitter, you'll get a notification when that happens. If you have something that you'd like for me to consider for the show, hit me up and let me know. My contact details are in the video description, or you can tweet with the CNCN hashtag and I will pick it up. If I mentioned a tool that you use, tell me in the comments. And of course, if you liked what you saw today, click the like button, subscribe to the channel, be sure to click the little bell to get notifications when the show starts. I will be here every weekday as long as there's something to talk about, as long as my laptop, oh, I didn't even tell you guys, my laptop battery, I looked at it last night, it's like, so as long as I get my new iMac, which I should be getting this week, I hope, and as long as my laptop doesn't catch on fire, I will be here to share with you whatever I find. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you in the next show.